united. We understand that whether it's LA, DC, Chicago, or Baltimore, Trump's deployment of thousands of armed federal agents and military personnel into the nation's capital and other cities is the action of a wannabe dictator. For him, Donald Trump, abusing the power of the National Guard is not about protecting public safety, it's about control. It's about threatening diverse, successful, democratic-led cities like Chicago that refuse to bow down to authoritarianism. When Trump talks about restoring order with National Guard troops, I want to make sure that we understand what it is. It's a violent suppression of dissent. It's an expensive, unlawful political stunt. It's a distraction from the failed policies. It's an attempt to instill fear in those who would dare to protest. And it's a lie to justify violating our rights and disappearing our immigrant neighbors. Why would he be using distraction? You see, we have less than 30 days to pass a spending budget. And yet, here we are, the president is attempting to send the National Guard to send and terrorize cities instead of actually funding the government. See, we don't need Trump's troops on our streets. What we need, and what our constituents continue to say, is that we need an investment in our neighborhoods. We need investment in food and our tables, health care for our families, and safety that is rooted in justice and opportunity. In fact, thanks to those investments, Chicago's violent crimes have fallen 22% to date. Homicides are down more than 33% in the past year, while shootings are down by 38%. Let me go ahead and say this about Chicago once again, because apparently the president doesn't believe in facts. Crimes have fallen 22% to date, and shootings are down by 38%. Trump's plan to deploy the National Guard to Chicago is just the beginning. Today, Trump is eroding our constitutional boundaries and normalizing the abuse of our military power so that he can succeed when he failed his first term. He seeks to use military power to undermine our democratic institutions, perpetrate a coup, and hold our country hostage. So let's be very clear, Mr. President. We don't want or need kings, dictators. We don't need the National Guard in Chicago or Baltimore or New York City. We will not be silenced, and we will not bend the knee. We stand here united as members of Congress because we understand that our fight is not just about one city. When armed troops are sent into American communities to suppress protests, to target civil society leaders, or to facilitate the disappearance of our neighbors, it is not just a local issue. It strikes at the core of our very own democracy. And we cannot let this continue. We have to continue to resist, and this moment demands courage. It demands us to understand that we must obstruct and do everything we can to oppose any of these authoritarian actions against our cities when it's threatening our people, our freedoms, and our democracy. It is why we must fight back. It is why we're here this morning, because we know it will require legislative action, legal action, and the local organizing that is happening on the ground that we are supporting and we will continue to do. And with that, I want to introduce to you a congresswoman who has been holding the line here in Washington, D.C. for many years and will continue to be a champion for justice, Eleanor Holmes Norton.
3 weeks ago, despite historically low crime for purposes opposed by 8 of 10 DC residents, President Trump declared a crime emergency in DC as a pretext for federalizing DC's locally funded police department. He deployed more than 2,000 National Guard troops, put guns in their hands and sent mass ICE officers to forcibly take community members from our streets. President Trump has used DC residents as props in a political play to showcase his own power. While the president claims that federal control of DC is necessary to combat crime, his own actions severely jeopardize public safety in the district. Earlier this year, the president and Republicans in Congress intentionally limited DC's ability to spend its own local funds, forcing DC to cut roughly $1 billion halfway through its fiscal year from its own budget, which could have further funded DC's police, fire, and emergency response services and other public safety issues. He pardoned nearly 1,600 individuals who attacked the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, including hundreds of convicted of assaulting police officers. He fired and demoted dozens of DC's motions. The emergency exists in DC that the president did not create himself. As DC's sole member of Congress, I have led the federal legislative response to Donald Trump's unlawful, unwarranted, and unprecedented actions. I introduced the termination resolution to end the federalization of MPD with Judiciary Committee Ranking Member Jamie Raskin, a longtime ally of the district who is here with us today. I introduced the bill to deployed in D.C. to address crime to wear body cameras, which would provide much needed transparency and accountability. Yesterday, I introduced 2 bills to give D.C. full control over its own National Guard and police. And last week, I wrote the Defense and National Guard Bureau demanding answers about the scope, the parameters, mission, and cost of National Guard deployment. More than 700,000 people count themselves, all of ourselves, as DC residents. We are Americans, worthy and capable of the same autonomy granted to the residents of the state. However, police force would not be subjected to the federalization and action that wouldn't be possible for any other police department in the country. The only permanent remedy that would give D.C. the same rights and protections enjoyed by other American jurisdictions is making my D.C. statehood bill law. To be content with less than statehood is to concede the equality of citizenship that is the birthright of D.C. residents as American citizens. Although D.C. lacks statehood, makes it more vulnerable
Someone doesn't want this woman to be
to president's abuse of power. He has frequently made it known that his authoritarian ambitions do not end with D.C. Thank you to Congresswoman Ramirez for inviting me to speak today. Your constituents in Chicago are also Americans who are worthy of governing their own local affairs, and I'm proud to be here with you today defending Chicago's right to the same protections preserved for decades.
I'm Congressmember Judy Chu, and I stand with the ACLU and all of you here today to say no to President Trump's authoritarian takeover of my community of Los Angeles, of Washington, D.C., of Chicago, and any community across the country. I represent a district in Los Angeles County, and I want to tell you, it was just yesterday that U.S. District Judge Charles Breyer ruled that Trump's use of military troops in Los Angeles was illegal. Trump can act as a national police force with the president as its chief. He barred the Pentagon from using National Guard members and Marines for performing local police functions like arrests and crowd control. In his 52-page ruling, he warned that Trump appears intent on creating a national police force with the president as its chief, and that by doing what he did, Trump violated a long-standing law meant to prevent domestic law enforcement by the military. Well, yesterday I just returned from Los Angeles. That is where Trump sent 4,000 National Guardsmen and 700 Marines to our area when our local law enforcement had everything well under control. But why did he do it? Just for the purposes of intimidation. Of the 4,000 Guards members in LA, many were pulled away from the civilian roles that actually keep communities safe, like nurses, EMTs, teachers, service workers, food and agriculture workers. They were yanked from saving lives and serving neighbors just for Trump's political theater. He is ripping National Guard soldiers away from their jobs and families so he can trample on our constitutional rights and disappear our neighbors off the street. And it is a waste of your taxpayer dollars. This stunt is costing taxpayers tens of millions of dollars that could be used to expand healthcare, fund our schools, or increase housing. So this is not about reducing crime or keeping our neighbors safe. It's about enacting the largest cut to healthcare in our nation's history and shoveling trillions of dollars in tax breaks to the ultra-rich. Donald Trump is needlessly deploying thousands of troops and tanks onto our street to distract from the harms that his policies are causing. Never before in our nation's history has the military been used in this way. These are the tactics of a dictatorship. And while this is going on, masked agents have flooded our streets. They are terrorizing people and they are refusing to identify themselves. It's all about intimidation, racial profiling, and harassment. But we cannot let that happen, not in LA, not here in DC, not in Chicago, not in America. This ruling from yesterday shows just how important it is that we keep fighting against Trump's illegal and authoritarian actions here in Washington, D.C. and other major cities. Because when we keep fighting, we can win, just as we did yesterday. So we will not be silenced. We stand with all Americans peacefully dissenting against this administration. Together, in the streets, in the courts, and in Congress, we will stop this authoritarian power grab.
And now I'd like to introduce Congressman Glenn Ivey, who represents parts of Baltimore.
Good morning. My name is Glenn Ivey. I'm the congressman who represents Prince George's County, which is the eastern border of Washington, D.C. I have two of my kids that live here in the Washington, D.C. One of my grandkids lives here. And I was a federal prosecutor down the street for 4 years here in Washington, D.C. So I understand how this ought to work. When I was prosecuting there, D.C. was having somewhere in the range of 450 to 500 homicides per year. Crime's been going down dramatically since then, certainly in the last couple of years. And it's been going down for a couple of reasons. One is that they've been doing an outstanding job of integrating enforcement with intervention and prevention programs that have been moving things down, getting the guns off the street, but more importantly, making sure that you don't just get there after the shots have been fired and somebody's on the ground. You try and reach out to these kids who are in trouble before they get to that point and take care of it then. The Biden administration had put programs in place to help do that. We know it's not serious for the Trump administration because one of the first things he did was cut the funding for those kind of programs. And we also know this isn't a serious effort because one of the first things they did was eliminate the Office of Gun Violence Reduction